Well, this certainly sucks. The Circle is the kind of bad movie that can only be made by a talented cast. You have to be good at your job and committed to the craft to put this much earnest and sincere effort into such an obvious pile of bullshit. In this case, the filmmakers have taken no less than Emma Watson, Patton Oswalt, John Boyega, Karen Gillan, and Tom fucking Hanks and sent them all trudging to an adaptation of a Dave Eggers book that plays out like a parody novel trying to imagine what it might have looked like if Michael Crichton had written something dumber than State of Fear. It's relentlessly stupid, paranoid, and backward in the way that most so-called techno thrillers tend to be, and if it wasn't trying to be taken so goddamn seriously, it might have been a lot of fun instead of a boring-ass chore destined to one day be declared a camp classic by people actually in the tech industry for all the stuff it gets hilariously wrong. It keeps insisting that it's this cutting-edge warning about the dark side of Silicon Valley, but it doesn't seem to know all that much about it, so it mostly plays out like those similarly cheesy Japanophobic techno thrillers from the 90s, except instead of Asians are scary, we're all supposed to be terrified of the millennial workplace aesthetic. Ooh. The basic storyline, if you can call it that, is that Emma Watson, who's actually very good here, even if she has not yet mastered the magic spell for making her American accent hold up all the way through a scene, is a small-town girl who somehow is exactly smart enough to score a dream job working for a tech giant called The Circle, but not exactly smart enough to realize that she's working for really, really obvious supervillains until it's too late. So yeah, it's essentially the Hank Scorpio episode of The Simpsons, except The Simpsons at least actually bothered to give Scorpio a coherent, wicked scheme. The big evil of The Circle is extreme data mining, but it never actually bothers to explain why that's a bad thing outside of, ooh, isn't new technology scary? But it's not like there isn't real spooky, shady shit in the tech world to make movies out of. Anti-labor ideology, gentrification, rampant sexism, fuck, literally everything about Peter Thiel. Hell, Uber's recent bullshit alone should be worth a whole movie, probably, but none of that stuff is actually in The Circle, the title of which, for the record, refers to a fictional company that's basically Facebook if it was organized like Google and run by Steve Jobs. Instead, the plot pretty much runs with what if Google but evil, and then can't come up with a reason we're meant to be terrified of Tom Hanks' sinister scheme to put lots of webcams everywhere. That's pretty much it. Instead, the film tries to get all topical by focusing more on abuse by users than abuse by the company, so the moral arc of the story ends up being, inadvertently I assume and or hope, all about how this is actually Emma Watson's fault for daring to try and rise above her blighted small-town blue-collar roots. You see, the big inciting incident of Act 2 is that she has this nobly technology-hating, rustic boyfriend who was never a boyfriend pining away for her back home, and when she posts about him making deer antler sculptures on her not Facebook, people mistakenly harass him on social media for presumed animal cruelty. Because as we all know, the true victims of organized internet harassment campaigns have always been handsome working-class white men. But then later, when she helps The Circle invent a search engine for tracking real people, it ends up leading to that same guy getting harassed to the point that he accidentally dies in a car crash. Yes, girls, that's the moral of the story. If you try to better yourself instead of immediately settling down with a nice local boy from the neighborhood, you may have accidentally friend-zoned him to death. But apart from being incurably stupid, the whole thing feels slipshod and chopped up to boot, which is supposedly the result of massive reshoots that, at least from the sound of things, led to the film diverging sharply from the plot of the book, which I'm told involved Watson's character actually becoming one of the primary villains, rather than sort of half-heartedly realizing she was almost turning evil and then deciding not to. Gillen's character in particular has a major story arc that eventually sputters out and goes nowhere, while Oswalt's secondary villain seems to have been set up for further reveals that don't end up happening. 1 star, and remember, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean your movie doesn't actually suck.